Hello, and welcome to our talk by David Tampone and Philip Epler. Today we'll be talking about the amazing parrotfish and their peculiar feeding behavior. We hope you guys are able to walk away from this talk knowing a little more about the world around you and what animals inhabit this space with us. Imagine a beautiful tropical beach with crystal clear light blue waters and palm trees and white pearly sand. Have you ever wondered where the sand comes from? The sand you find on beaches forms when rocks break down from erosion over millions of years. A constant wave movement along shores around and polish the rocks. Even more interesting, ocean beach sand is also composed of the shells of various ocean creatures. Parrotfish are a type of marine fish that inhabit coral reefs. They are known for their large size and colorful appearance, as well as their beak, which is where they get their name. In these coral reefs, they feed on algae and coral polyps that grow on the calcium carbonate skeletons of the corals. They use their hard beak to break off pieces of coral to consume what resides on them. The pieces of coral then get passed through their digestive system and get broken down into smaller and smaller pieces. The byproduct of their digestion is fine sand made from the calcium carbonate of coral.
Here is a parrotfish's natural environment taken by your one and only. And here is a clip of a stoplight parrotfish that I saw in the Caribbean at night. In biology, there are proximate ultimate explanations for traits and behaviors. Proximate being the how with the mechanisms and developmental aspects, ultimate being the why with evolutionary history and function. In parrotfish, we find that both proximate and ultimate explanations can be found as parrotfish obtain this behavior of eating coral evolutionarily through this family Scaridae. However, they are now accepted as a subfamily of Labridae wrasses called Scarinae. Parrotfish evolved from wrasses which primarily consume invertebrates and already have a crushing-like jaw to be able to break down exoskeletons. Although the usage of these jaws depend greatly on the type of wrasse, majority are cleaners and are small. Over time, parrotfish evolved these specialized jaws by having their teeth merged together to form a beak-like structure that allows them to consume coral and scrape algae off of surfaces. They have a second set of jaws called pharyngeal jaws that grind coral into sand like a cheese grater. In addition, they have digestive enzymes that break down algae and calcium carbonate skeletons of corals inside their stomach. The three types of jaws seen in parrotfish likely started as browsers, which fed on seagrass, then moved to scrapers, light coral consumption, and then diversified into excavators, heavy coral consumption, for those who developed even stronger jaws and pharyngeal teeth to bite into coral. We can visualize the wrasse family and the subfamily of parrotfish from the study done on phylogenetic perspectives on reef fish and functional traits and their evolution. The common ancestor of all wrasse and parrotfish is at the center point. The numerical values going from the center to the edge of the circle are the timescale dated in millions of years. The wrasses evolved from the common ancestor and eventually evolved into the subfamily of parrotfish, which are indicated by the dark and light green at the top left of the key. As previously discussed, the parrotfish diversified into three different types of jaws, the first being the browsing type, which is the darkest green. Then the scrapers and excavators branched off there, as you can see from the many lighter colored branches.
We can visualize the ways these traits diverse by shrinking down the previous phylogenetic tree and focusing primarily on these groups of parrotfish. This phylogenetic tree comes from the Streelman et al. 2002 paper. If we were to take the feeding behaviors and map them on the tree of the parrotfish genuses, we'd see a pattern like this. From these feeding behaviors, we can draw conclusions on what had to happen in the parrotfish ancestors past to get the conclusions we see today using the rule of parsimony. Parsimony is the idea that the simplest explanation for evolutionary traits is the most likely explanation. So, we could assume that the oldest common ancestor for these genus of parrotfish was a browser. With the fewest changes, we can draw the conclusions we see here. Additionally, we can conclude that Scarus and Hipposcarus have analogous feeding behavior traits because they both have evolved scraping behavior independently. They don't have a common ancestor who was also a scraper, while Chlorus, Cetoscarus, and Bulbometapon are homologous excavators because we can draw the origin of that feeding behavior back to a common ancestor.
This specialized jaw trait and feeding behaviors likely originated from food competition with other organisms, leading to the expansion of their diets, which no other reef fish can consume. The benefits of consuming both coral and algae were a massive opening to parrotfish and provided the necessary nutrients to survive. The better options an organism has for food means that the better chances of survival and reproducing an organism has. The persistence of this trait is likely because when parrotfish break down old corals, they recycle the nutrients, and this leads to more reef growth, as the broken down particles will accumulate and create new structures for the reef to grow off. In addition to this, the consumption of algae on the corals on the reef prevent the reefs from being overtaken by harmful algae, which promotes growth and stability on the reef. Finally, the sand produced in their excrement allows for the formation of beaches in tropical regions.
When investigating animal behavior, we often wonder how these traits continue generationally. When considering the evolution of any trait, we must consider what a trait needs for selection to act upon it. The most important feature of a trait is for it to be heritable, meaning that the traits need to be able to be passed down from parent to offspring. Another very important feature of these traits is that they need to be variable for selection to act upon them, and that the variability needs to influence and lead to changes of survivability and fitness in organisms, like we explained before. We can measure this heritability through many ways. These measurements will allow us to determine how certain traits will evolve through time. When looking at parrotfish, let's say we want to measure the heritability of their feeding behavior. Maybe we want to know how heritable their biting rate and frequency were. Alfaro and Westneat reveal that the S. aceri parrotfish had faster bites and more bites per episode of feeding than the parrotfish C. bicolor, in a very interesting study that measured their muscle activity using EMGs. EMG stands for electromyography, which simply measures the amount of electrical activity in muscles, as seen on this figure here. Faster movements have closer electric activity, and slower movements are more spread out. The different rates and the number of their bites shows us that there's variation among these feeding traits. Additionally, it allows us to quantify these traits and test the heritability of the feeding behaviors. Now there are 3 ways we can measure heritability of animal behaviors: parent-offspring regressions, cross-fostering, and truncation selection. Parent-offspring regressions measures the correlation between the mid-parent values for a trait and their offspring's trait. Let's say we were measuring the bite rate of S. aceri and we wanted to know the heritability of that trait. The first thing we need to do is gather many groups of parents with various biting rates. Maybe do some with 2 bites per second and some do 3 bites per second. In any case, we take the parents' bite rates and find their mid-parent score, simply by adding their rates and dividing them by 2. Then, we can take their offspring's bite rate and plot that on the graph. Our mid-parent score is our x-axis, and the offspring score is our y-axis. Plotting the parent groups with their offspring creates a scatter plot from which we can calculate a regression line. This line allows us to see the possible correlation between the 2 variables, and the slope of that line is our heritability of bite rate. We could do the same for cross-fostering if we wanted to see if there were any environmental influences on biting behavior. Maybe the environment the parrotfish grow up in requires them to acclimate to harder and faster bites to get food quicker in the case of predator presence. To find a relationship, we can do a cross-fostering experiment in which we raise a parrotfish with foster parents to test whether or not environment or genetics plays a role with biting rate. This test does not give you a specific value for heritability, but allows you to see how traits may be affected by the environment around us. As a final test, which is slightly more complicated, we can do truncation selection, which is often used for artificial selection by humans on animals they want to domesticate. In this test, we need to find many different bite rates of many parrotfish. This group is what we'd call the parental generation. We can plot this generation on a histogram, getting possibly a normal distribution. Now, if we want to select for parrotfish that bites at a very high rate, we can select parents at the end of the distribution and breed them together, and plotting the histogram of their offspring's bite rate. This should shift the distribution to the right. We can calculate the heritability of this bite frequency in the following way: dividing the response of selection by the strength of selection. The response of selection can be calculated by subtracting the mean of the parental generation from the mean of the offspring generation. You can then calculate the strength of selection by subtracting the actual parent mean by the parental generation. Dividing those two values should get you the heritability score.
Leaving this talk, the main takeaway point that you should remember is that you lay on fish poop whenever you have a day at the beach, and that parrotfish are important parts of marine and terrestrial ecosystems.
We hope that you can also appreciate the diversity of life on our planet and the intricacies of animal behavior. As you click off from this video, maybe consider your own behaviors. Where did they come from? How did they originate? And how do they benefit us? Thank you for watching, and we hope you learned something new you can share with your friends and family.